Good evening. Seeing as we have a quorum and it is 6:30, I'm going to go ahead and call this deliberation session of the Bloomington Common Council to order here on Wednesday, April 9th. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Flaherty.
Here.
Ruff.
Here.
Rallo.
Here.
Piedmont Smith.
Here.
Stossberg. Here. Daly is absent. Zulik.
Here.
Rosenbarger.
Here.
And Asari.
Thank you. I've been trying to start out most meetings this year with some items of historical interest. I skipped that last week because we were trying really, really hard to have a really fast meeting, which we accomplished very well. But today I am going to start off with this little tidbit related to Black culture in Bloomington. So in the early 1970s, Dr. Herman C. Hudson oversaw several developments related to Black culture on the IU campus, including founding the Black Studies Department, opening the Black Culture Center, and the Afro-American Arts Institute. And that includes the African American Dance Company. And I wanted to highlight that tonight because this weekend they are having their 50th anniversary two-part performance on Friday and Saturday night at the Buskirk Chumley. So I just thought that that was something important to note, especially in this moment where it seems like there's a lot of pieces of culture that are trying to be canceled. This is something this weekend that is going to continue to be highlighted, hopefully, for at least another 50 years. So, on to our agenda summation. Since last week's meeting was very brief, we're going to start with a period of council member reports tonight. Then we are going to have a council discussion related to budget priorities for 2026. We're going to have public comment related to budget priorities, some notes on council schedule, and then adjournment. So, we will start on my right with council member reports. Councilmember Flaherty.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Ruff. Councilmember Rallo.
Yes, just to announce that Councilmember Ruff and I have our monthly constituent meeting this Saturday at 10 a.m., which is April 11th, 12th, I believe. So you can find the link at the council website, bloomington.in.gov/council, and you're welcome to join us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, as many of you know, there was a large demonstration here in Bloomington and many cities throughout the country on Saturday, a hands-off rally to let the federal government and especially Donald Trump's administration know that we value social justice, we value integrity, we value the rights of people from all walks of life. We value diversity, equity, and inclusion, and many other things that were addressed during the rally. And I just wanted to mention that, and there was a good turnout, and Councilmember Zulik and I spoke, and Councilmember Asari as well, and some of our colleagues from the county and state governments as well. And it's just very important for us to keep speaking out about what's happening in our federal government because it is not normal and it is not acceptable. For myself, I do have a constituent meeting this Saturday, as always the second Saturday of the month. It'll be at 11 a.m. And since the farmers market has started back up in front of City Hall, there will be an in-person component, so it'll be a hybrid meeting. I will be in person in the McCloskey room of City Hall from 11 to 12, but you can also join via Zoom, and there will be a link. As for council members Rallo and Ruff, there's a link on the City Council webpage to that Zoom meeting. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Going down to the other end, Councilmember Asari.
No report, thanks.
Councilmember Rosenbarger.
No report.
Councilmember Zulik.
My new newsletter will be releasing on Monday, so if you'd like to subscribe, you can go to tinyurl.com/civiczoo. I hope to be interesting. Thanks.
Thank you. And I have a small report. I also want to make sure to announce my constituent meeting well in advance. It is not this Saturday, it is next Saturday, April 19th, and it will be here right down the hall in the McCloskey room at 11, from 11 to 12. And then also this Saturday, in addition to Councilmember Piedmont Smith's constituent meeting, there's actually the Indiana Democratic Party has organized a People's Town Hall here in City Hall from 10 to 11:30, and there will be various Democratic officials there having that town hall. So that is the second thing that I wanted to share. And then this transitions us into our discussion tonight. So we have a little community survey, which is linked to a QR code that I believe our council attorney is going to get up on the screen. That is a very simple survey of what we are starting to talk about tonight, which is budget outcome areas and budget outcomes. We are shifting to outcome-based budgeting, and so part of the idea with that is to prioritize our outcomes. What kind of outcomes do we want? So before we ever have any discussion about it, I want members of the public to take this little survey and take like 3-4 minutes. It is literally your top 5 outcome areas without any other additional information right now in terms of what any of that means or what might fit into those areas. And this is what happens when you have a teacher in charge of things, is the teacher gives you a pretest. So this is like a pretest. I'm sorry. Not really though. So this is the moment where council pauses for just a second to give the public just a minute to do that survey, while council members can also think about that, because we had a whole little budget worksheet that we were supposed to work on. And hopefully we will be prepared for that conversation next. Council members want to take this little survey, that's probably okay too, but we're going to talk about it, so. I'm sorry, what? No. That would have been fun if I had thought of that earlier. Just to review the process by which we're going to manage this year's budget conversations, for those of you who maybe were not at the meeting last week, tonight's discussion sort of starts off this process of prioritization of council. And so we're going to have a conversation tonight. Next week at the fiscal committee meeting, the fiscal committee is charged with kind of synthesizing the conversation tonight and building a priority list, like a prioritized list of council budget priorities. And then we will come back as a full council on the 30th to vote on that list from the fiscal committee. Basically, it'll be a test to see if the fiscal committee managed to synthesize the conversation well. So this is just the beginning of the conversation. And so at the fiscal committee meeting next week, there will certainly be the results of this. And I appreciate the 7 responses that have come in so far. 8 responses that have come in so far. Fantastic. That will be open. I'll leave it open for a little while longer, but I really did want to kind of get like a pre-look from people. And I kind of do expect that things might change after hearing discussion and after this whole process tonight. But I think that we're going to move on right now to our actual conversation. So in terms of council members and how we're going to facilitate this today, we're going to start with that conversation of step 1, choosing and defining outcome areas with everybody being able to kind of talk about their top 1 or 2 or 3 and the reasons why they chose those outcome areas. I'm hoping that takes, I believe, I forgot to write my times down on my cheat sheet here. I believe that was 20 to 30 minutes set aside for that part. And then we're gonna move on to part 2, which is facilitating discussions of specific budget interests or items. Okay, so specific things that council members go, yes, I definitely want that in. And then we're kind of gonna have a break/community engagement activity. So if you're in chambers, you'll notice that there's some big sheets of paper there over on the side, and on those sheets of paper are the 12 items that were on that survey and that were in the packet as examples of outcome areas. So our task for the community and council members too during that break is to think of a specific program, activity, something that the city does that you personally just think is really, really valuable or is really important. It can be something really big, or it can be, something really small. Write it on a Post-it note and then stick it under whichever particular area it is that you think it fits under. After that, we're going to, council is going to come back together and have the discussion of step 2, the broad goals, and the kind of specific measurable outcomes that we think that we've thought of already. Then we'll have a period of general public comment around the budget items, and that will essentially be our meeting. Okay? Does anybody have any questions about what we're doing here tonight before we start? Great. So who wants to start by telling me or us their top 1 or 2 or 3 outcome areas? Yeah, say the bullets you picked, say why you picked them. Like, order them if you can. Like, I know, like, I personally kind of have a number 1 and a number 1A and 1B, and then a number 2 and a number 3. So I don't know how everybody else did it, but yeah, sharing those things and the whys. Who wants to start, or do I need to just like go down the list? All right, go ahead, Councilmember Rosenberger.
I don't remember what I put on the list on the QR code. I'm just looking at the worksheet that I filled out, and you're asking just about the number, step 1, choose or define outcome areas?
Yes.
So my top 3, I think, were affordable housing and homelessness, transportation and mobility, and public safety. I guess I would say I chose those in general because I think they are the areas where things are in crisis, and I think they are the areas where we have the ability via our code and as council members to make the most impact in terms of, like, the work we're legally allowed to do here.
Okay, I want to put a hat, or put a, I think I want to ask you, you said those are the areas where you think council members can have the most impact. And I'm not sure if right now I want to have that specific discussion, but maybe in a little bit, I want to know what specific impact you think council members can have in those areas. Who's next? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
So I was also thinking of what the most dire needs of our community are. And so I had affordable housing and homelessness. Then I had health and human services, thinking mostly of mental health care and substance use disorder treatment. And then I had public safety, which is, of course, those 3 are all tied together as well. Now, equity was one item in the list, but I have a hard time thinking of that as a separate thing. I think that should be interwoven with all the other goals.
Great. Who wants to go next? Councilmember, sorry.
I think to me one of the I think one of the things that's maybe not directly reflected often in our budget is maybe the way I was thinking about it, but economic health and jobs is something that I'd like to see us prioritizing. That's probably, I think, has a lot of downstream effects on a lot of other things. Affordable housing, probably 1A or 2, and neighborhood livability and social health. That's why I said it's 3. I will just say, sort of maybe to also maybe I don't know, be provocative or open it up for further conversation as well. That I think there's some discussion about whether these, I think these are interesting suggestions of the categories, and maybe there's some overlap with some of them as well, and obviously had a hand in making this list, right? But I think it's an interesting question of even what we might define as our buckets. I think there's a really good start there, but I think there's some overlap, I think, as Councilmember Piedmont Smith mentioned as well. But yeah, those are probably mine. I would think sort of my one star is economic health and jobs, affordable housing, and then neighborhood livability and social health, which to me sort of involves transportation and public safety and things like that as well.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Zulik.
I'll just say my number one priority is affordable housing, and I think that a lot of these categories tie into each other, and sometimes if taking care of one, some of the other things will be taken care of as well. For example, public safety. We know that when people have the resources that they need, crime goes down, stuff like that. And so I think everything is pretty intertwined, but making sure that everyone has an affordable place to live. And then I would say 2A and 2B are transportation and mobility and neighborhood livability and social health. I think they all tie in together as to what a healthy, successful life looks like.
Thank you. Who's next down here at the other end? Councilmember Rallo.
Sure. I picked 5 actually, and then prioritized them, but I could winnow it down to 3 where I could apply specific budget items.
Feel free to do your whole 5 from 1 to 5.
Well, and some are more related to policy directions than actual expenditures, but public safety, housing, economic development, equity, health and human services sort of together on that one, and environment sustainability.
Great, thank you. Next. Councilmember Flaherty.
Sure. Like my colleagues, I would say, a lot of these topics are intersectional, so it feels a bit arbitrary to prioritize them. I think they're all important, but in naming a few, I think I would focus on where we're struggling the most and have the most need for making change from where we are now. Number 1 for me would be transportation and mobility. Specifically, we've adopted a goal of 0 deaths and serious injuries in our streets. We have had hundreds and hundreds of serious injuries in our streets and quite a few deaths in the last 5 years. I would also call that the biggest public safety problem we have, so pretty similar. Affordable housing and homelessness, and then equity, and would just again, echo that those are transportation equity is about how we improve safety for marginalized users of our roadways, things like that. Changes to our zoning code and how we increase housing supply, more diverse housing types, housing affordability, et cetera. That's a housing equity issue, et cetera. But I think equity for me is, I guess if I had to name the 3, it's transportation and mobility, affordable housing and homelessness, and equity. And then last note is just that, again, sustainability and action on climate, implementing our climate action plan is deeply intersectional with those as well. Thank you.
Right. Councilmember, sorry, what's your question?
Yeah, and just reflecting as well, I think I agree with Councilmember Flaherty. Thought in terms of thought experiment, one thing that I'm thinking a lot about is I think we might all prioritize affordable housing as an example, but we don't see that often reflected in our budget per se. And I think, maybe the levers that we have for that are perhaps more policy-based or less budgetary. But I'm interested in sort of thinking through that too, which is like, where are the things that we can have? I think to the question of like, what are our priorities? I like what are the word that you used, our big pain points, our emergency areas, right? But it's like, what can we do in those spaces with money? And so I maybe was thinking about this too from the perspective of, which of these areas can the city make big moves in putting influxes of cash into?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to differentiate. Councilmember Ruff, do you want to go or do you want me to go?
I'll just say, I agree with everybody. It's very hard to rank these. I didn't really have a success doing it, and they are so they're also interconnected. I liked Councilmember Flaherty's comment, and Councilmember Sari, I think, also suggested, looking at the areas where we come up shortest. In other words, if they're all relatively equally important, but some we may be doing better than in other areas, which is where we would want to start to maybe focus on where we can make the biggest difference, I think, as Councilman Flaherty suggested. But to me, and I don't know if anyone's mentioned this yet, but this idea of the high-performing government, right? That's a delivery of government services. And that's what we're really fundamentally about. So a lot of this falls under, to me, this idea of a high-performing government. That's what people look to us for, and that's what business looks to have secure, something they can rely on, a high-performing government to make investment in the community. And so looking at areas where maybe we're not as high-performing, whether it's things like street maintenance of the streets. I'm interested in possibly the idea of bringing back the leaf pickup program, for example, sort of some basic services. Anyway, that was my only real comment. So thank you for giving me an opportunity.
Okay, thanks. I would like to put a pin in the leaf pickup thing too, because that should be under a specific budget item interest in the part 2 of the discussion. So I want to make sure that that gets put under there. I'll go ahead and share mine if I can find them. So I also thought that they were really intersectional, of course, and I kind of put my number 1 as neighborhood livability and social health, kind of feeling like if people are doing well and there's livability and general social health, then that will start a ripple effect through lots of other things. And so kind of like a 1A and a 1B under that is affordable housing and public safety, because if we really want people, like if we want neighborhoods to be livable and we want people to be socially and mentally healthy, then they need to have a place to live and they need to feel safe in that place. And that encompasses, I think, both things like fire and police response, but also, Councilmember Flaherty, you mentioned I think it was you, transportation related, or maybe it was Councilmember Rosenberger. I can't remember who mentioned it first now. Just in terms of safety and security, it's not all about policing or fire protection. It's also about feeling safe to like go for a walk, that you're not going to get hit by a car, or drive a car and you're not going to get into an accident because people are driving well. So, and the roads are designed nicely. And so then, if that was my number 1, with those 2 little caveats, then my number 2 was transportation and mobility, partly because of how that ties into public safety, and livability in terms of being able to get to where you need to go. And then number 3 was economic health and jobs, kind of for what Councilmember Asari said in terms of that trickle-down effect of like, if people have jobs, then they're more likely to be able to, go to the doctor and access other pieces of the community and have stable housing and that kind of thing. So I think right now, just to help out the fiscal committee, what did people here were areas that we had in common? If we had to do a top 3 for all of council, what did council members hear that we all had in common? I'm going to make you guys think, so the fiscal committee has some help next week. Housing. Does everybody agree with that?
Yes.
Does anybody not agree with that?
Number 1?
I don't think that I necessarily said to rank, but just try to do like 3 that everybody kind of agreed with.
Yeah, you know, I'm sorry, I neglected to mention one that I added myself. But can I just throw this out?
Yeah.
Basic infrastructure. That is road paving, stormwater, sidewalks, things that it's up to us to deliver to the public. But I'm fine with housing being as one of the top priorities. We can talk about what type of housing later.
Yeah, I want to put a pin in the basic infrastructure too, because I kind of thought of that under specific budget things in terms of maintenance. So let's make sure that gets brought up again too. So generally speaking though, we agree that housing should go maybe on the list. I do want to ask though, what we think in terms of what was mentioned already, that difference between like investing dollars versus like legislation. And if we could talk about that in context of housing, maybe for just a minute in terms of like.
Well, and I also think maybe it's helpful to Councilmember Flaherty's point that, I mean, at the moment, this is, like we said, I mean, it's a little arbitrary prioritizing them per se. I mean, as, and Councilmember Rosenberger was just saying some good things, you should say them, or feel welcome to, but maybe we want to cycle back to the question of ranking and prioritization as we talk through about specific things we want to see in the budget pertinent to this. Because, I mean, to your point, it's like, if there are things we can fund to improve affordable housing, and that is our priority already in the general sense, there's a conversation of like, what are our general priorities, comprehensive plans and things like that, but then there's also the question of like, what's our priority for this budget specifically?
Right. Councilmember Rosenberger, did you want to share something?
I was just, there was a question on this end about how could we fund what could we fund in terms of affordable housing and housing affordability? So I just like shot out some ideas, but I don't know that it's time,
But I think that's illustrate the point that there are levers we can pull.
Like one example was just like incentivizing like some kind of program, like down payment assistance, but for small developers who are maybe wanting to build like 10-unit apartment buildings or a 10-unit apartment building that is affordable. And so like incentivizing the types of housing we want to see that we're not seeing because it's not financially feasible basically right now. Of course, the other part would be opening that up in the UDO so that people can build them as well.
Isak, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, for that matter, I think what's pertinent to a lot of recent conversations that we've had, it's that at the end of last budget session when planning was here, the conversation directly was, are we going to what are we doing in this budget to move towards a form-based UDO? And they said, well, we'll put that in next year's budget as an example of another thing we can fund that should be prioritized if that's the direction we're trying to take.
Other thoughts on housing as something that we had in common? Councilmember Rallo?
Yes, I think housing generally, we're in agreement. Type of housing, I think maybe we differ. I don't know. But that's something we need to discuss. Some of it's policy related. On I've wondered for a long time, a lot of this owner-occupied potential single-family homes are now occupied by Airbnbs, something to the order of 900. I know West Lafayette has code that prohibits or caps it at least. I don't know if that's possible still. I think, we're apartment-rich community, but we're a owner-occupied poor community. So the type of housing really does matter. And I'm interested in all types that could be owner-occupied. And I'm certainly averse to policy that would remove affordable single-family or owner-occupied homes from the market. So there's more to say. I mean, in terms of investment, I would be interested in bonding for a land bank in order to provide space that we could dictate the type of housing that we need for the community, things like that. It's been discussed before. Councilmember Flaherty's mentioned it. So I think there are points of agreement, there are points of difference, but I think I've said enough, so I'll leave it there.
As a follow-up to that, how does that relate to the Summit Land Trust? Or are you kind of talking about types of things like the Summit Land Trust as being something that you would be interested in
Sorry,
giving support
could
to?
you state that I didn't quite get the whole?
You said that you were interested in bonding for a land bank.
Yeah.
And my follow-up question to that was like, how is that like or different from the Summit Land Trust? And so is it really that you're like interested in providing more support to that land trust movement?
Yes, I think that would be one way to go. I don't know exactly what types of control that we actually have. I think I need to review that. But the point is that the market doesn't seem to be delivering the type of housing that is in demand. And the housing study of 2019 indicated that that's what people wanted, was to purchase and build equity in homes rather than rent, because people are trapped in a rent trap. And then there's much more to say about rental housing in this community, too. Whether or not these large structures are even fully occupied. I understand that they're not. Anyhow, so sorry to Terry on that.
No, it's fine.
But I do think, I mean, sorry.
Go for it.
It's this tension here, I think, that's getting at the main point. I mean, if the core question is, what is it that we want to see reflected in this budget in terms of areas that we'd really like to see funded, I feel like a lot of, a lot of those things are in the policy realm, right? And so how do we hone out, like how do we tease out the things that we actually want to get funded in each of these areas?
Does anybody else have anything that they want to add about housing as an area of commonality? Councilmember Piedmont-Smith.
Well, I just don't want to leave out the other part of that, which is homelessness, housing and homelessness. I mean, I guess there's been a long-standing tension between addressing helping people who are unhoused now and using funds for that versus building solutions so that eventually we'll have hardly any unhoused people at all. And I think both are important. I mean, but I don't want to lose sight of, we need to make sure nobody dies homeless on our streets.
I do think it might be worth splitting those two, just because they do require two very different things, and funding for one looks very different than funding for the other, even if they are intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as a follow-up on that, I mean, we have it as affordable housing and homelessness, and even if we split those, then it's affordable housing, which is maybe different from just housing. So is it that we have housing in common, or that we have affordable housing in common?
Depends on affordable for whom.
Well, right.
Well, that may come out in further talking about what Councilmember Asare said as far as where do we actually want to spend money in 2026. So that might be teased out a little more when we get to that level.
Councilmember Zuluk?
Oh, I'll just point out that in different community engagement events with different organizations who work closely with the unhoused, a lot of what we've talked about is that $400 to $800 a month gap that's really missing in the 0 to 400 as well. And there are units available that are just going for way higher than really the majority of people in Bloomington can afford. And so I would say it's not a housing problem, it is an affordable housing problem.
Okay. Other thoughts on the housing that we had in common? All right, what else did anybody hear that there was also?
I think transportation came up in almost all of our, and what do we call it, transportation and mobility.
All right, does everybody agree, or does anybody disagree about putting transportation and mobility as a priority? Councilmember Rallo?
Can I have a question, ask a question? So are we ranking all of those? Are they all going to be prioritized to some degree, or are we just choosing a subset? How is this?
I think right now this is kind of a thought exercise.
Yeah, I think,
And-
I would
yeah.
actually suggest on that point, like, maybe we should move on and cycle back to the question of, you know, because I think when we talk about specifics, as Councilmember Piedmont Smith said, I think it will help tease out, it will answer for itself this question.
I agree. I think we may have different things in mind regarding these topics. And by informing each other, one might rise above another or fall relative to each other. So maybe we should proceed in that way. Just my preference.
So we want to move on to the next stage in my facilitation, which is discussion of specific budget items. Because that does, I mean, it could play in, we've already kind of been talking about that a little bit. Well, if we do that, why don't we stick with the transportation and mobility that Councilmember Asare cited that we have in common, and does anybody have any specific budget items that they were interested in related to transportation and mobility?
Yes.
How about that?
Yes. Downtown circulator. I would like to see us fund a downtown circulator.
Second.
Okay. All right, so we have a downtown circulator on the list of things that people want to fund related to transportation. Are there other things related to transportation?
I mean, I'll say this, and I mean, I know that, I mean, to open up to this conversation, we have a transportation plan. So, you know, how about transportation plan be in the budget?
Does anybody want to cite specific pieces of the transportation plan that they want to, Councilmember Flaherty?
Yeah. A number of these areas, we're not starting from whole cloth. We do have plans, policies, goals in place already. The transportation plan and the safety action plan under Safe Streets for All, both should be guiding transportation decision-making and implementation. We had a high priority network that we have not finished building out, the timeline for which ends this year. So we did relatively well, maybe 70, 80%, but failed to fully implement the priority network established in the transportation plan. So continuing to fund that and or updating that and funding an update that might be more informed by the Safe Streets for All safety action plan would be one approach. We've also chronically underfunded sidewalks for, I don't know, decades, and pushed for more funding, secured a very small amount of increased funding this year in the council sidewalk committee budget of $500K. That's still almost nothing relative to the needs and relative to what our stated values and goals are. So I think we need to see considerable increases in funding across I think of it in multiple buckets. This has kind of evolved over time. I think of sidewalks, I think of multi-use paths, which serve both pedestrians and wheeled mobility users. I think of protected bicycle infrastructure, and increasingly I've been thinking about intersection treatments as well. So shorter crossing distances, accessibility, curb ramps, those are kind of distinct from any of those other buckets. So again, multi-use path, protected bicycle infrastructure, sidewalks, and intersections. And we really need annual capital funding for these things. I mean, we had a discussion last year about, bonding for capital expenditures, which is all well and good. But when it's a recurring need and it's needed annually, more or less in perpetuity, or at least for decades before we're going to, dig ourselves out of the hole, or possibly achieve our Vision Zero goals, I think the general budget is a perfectly appropriate place for this type of capital expenditure that's going to be recurring. It would allow a level of planning and implementation that we simply haven't been able to achieve. I mean, we'll see what's possible. I think $8 million is a figure that is reasonable relative to the ambition and goals we have, again, to eliminate deaths on our streets. Relative to the progress we've been able to make so far. I tried to get into the numbers a little bit last year with the city engineer and actually assess the capital outlay remaining to implement some of these things on the timelines we said we were going to, and then estimating what the local match would need to be, assuming we're going to be leveraging MPO dollars and everything else like we do to the maximum, ability to the maximum max we can. So I don't know. Those are some of the things informing my thinking on it. The different categories of things we need to be investing in for a complete streets approach, which is what our city policy is, and to essentially make progress on our Vision Zero goal. Like, that is going to require a pretty radical shift in how we think about and fund infrastructure if we're serious about it.
Second.
Can I ask you a follow-up on that real quick? You threw out that $8 million number. Is that what you think probably needs to be spent like per year right now on that kind of infrastructure, like generally speaking, in an ongoing way, or until we catch
Yes.
up, or was that just kind of a?
No, I think I mentioned 4 buckets. You could think of that as maybe approximately $2 million in each bucket. That would maybe equate to something like 60-40 in favor of pedestrians over wheeled mobility users in terms of like who's the primary beneficiary in each of those different buckets. $2 million would be 4 times the council's sidewalk budget right now for sidewalks specifically, for instance. It would allow us to actually start addressing things like the South Walnut Street Pike missing sidewalk where a pedestrian was killed a couple of years ago. Lots of other sidewalk gaps like that in the community that we are not making progress on. And so we need to plan to coordinate the action, but yes, I think that's like a reasonable, like achievable level. We could certainly spend more. There's plenty more to be done. But I think if you sustained that level of investment over a couple of decades, we would see real transformative change.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Rallo?
I think Councilmember Rosenberger had her hand up before I did.
Councilmember Rosenberg?
I was just going to get a little more nitty-gritty and just how the climate action plan is in, it's really, I mean, I think it's quite fun and exciting to read our goals, because when we look at the transportation part of the climate action plan, just like it's, increased transit utilization by 10% over 2018 by 2030, increased shared mobility, like carpooling by 3% of work commutes, Encourage density and increase housing options and affordability with the goal of increasing gross density by 3% of 2018 values. That one isn't about cars, it's about housing, obviously. But I'm just saying, like, so we have all these, right, we have these goals that it's great that we don't have to, like, reinvent any wheels, pun intended, because reduce single occupancy automobile use by 8% of 2018 values, right? So all these climate action plan goals are also just so intertwined with our transportation outcome in itself, yeah, and safe streets for all.
I also, to some degree, want to put a pin in that too, or just note that that also relates to like the step 3 of specific outcomes and measurable results, because all of those things are also measurable results that, you know, we want to see that come out of those plans, and yeah, the climate action plan is kind of full of those. Councilmember Rallo, did you want to go then?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that, and these are interconnected, as we said, but when I was thinking of an ask this year for basic infrastructure, and Mayor Thompson, I think, alluded to it during the State of the City, it was to pave neglected streets. Basic maintenance. I mean, it doesn't do a bicyclist any good to hit a pothole. In fact, they're probably going to be far more damaged than a car hitting a pothole, well, that might break an axle. I'm aware, I've been around long enough to know that I've asked many, many times, Public Works, what is the street paving schedule? And I'm invariably told that it's a 20-year cycle. However, I know, I've been here long enough to know that there are streets that haven't been paved in 40 years. And they're crumbling. And yet, you know, I hate to beat this horse, but if a greenway goes in where there's crumbling street, I think that sends a wrong signal, especially one that's not necessary to the public, and that is that our priorities are scrambled. So this is one of my top, I think, requests this year of the mayor, of the administration, is the maintenance of our streets, and can we get on it? Can we repair the ones that are most affected and crumbling, and then can we get on a 20-year cycle? Is that conceivable? And have some dedicated fund for that purpose so it doesn't get neglected in the future.
Thank you. Councilmember Piedmont Smith, I saw your hand up earlier. Did you want to?
No.
Okay.
President Strasburg, I had a
Go for
follow-up
it.
comment.
Councilmember Ruff.
I appreciate that Councilmember Flaherty's, obviously spent some time on the numbers and coming up with some estimates of what the numbers of what the cost would be to increase progress in the areas of transportation that he was talking about. My question is for Councilmember Flaherty, because I'm interested in, might be a relative to the cost of the actual capital investment. It might not be as significant, but do you envision additional staffing in planning, transportation, and engineering would be necessary to maintain sort of have a year after year increase in dedicated investment and progress in construction and development of the transportation network that you see? Would it probably require additional folks?
Madam President.
Go for it.
Okay, wait.
Councilmember Flaherty.
Good question. I met with City Engineer Andrew Seaboard this morning for a good period of time talking about this and some other things. And we talked about that specific question. I think it's possible, yes. I think cities that have taken their Vision Zero goals seriously tend to have Vision Zero positions. A good friend of mine is the lead Vision Zero engineer for the City of Chicago, formerly City of Seattle before that. Smaller communities also have these positions, though. And so, yeah, maybe something like that in the planning department ultimately would be needed. And then on the engineering side, there are constraints that we run into relative to the ability to manage projects. Some of that can be managed by contracting out the projects, but they still require a level of oversight and project management that I think can be a factor. I know they're trying to hire right now another traffic engineer position that should help with some of that, and have had some other restructuring in the department to help reformulate positions and have them better suited to do that type of management. So I think some of that's already in motion. I think also, yes, it's possible this would warrant a position or two additionally, possibly one in each department, if we're able to make those kind of commitments.
Thank you. Other specific funding proposals related to transportation before we move on to like other specific funding things? Okay. Other specific funding things like at all? Like, wait, I asked somebody to put a pin in something earlier and I don't remember what it was. Was it, maybe it was Councilmember Rallo with the maintenance, and that already got in here. Yeah, you would have, we already talked about yours a little bit, yeah. All right, other specific, Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about housing as an overall issue that we all agree is important in one way or another. So I had an idea, more specific idea for that topic, and that is to fund a housing summit to discuss strategies with builders and funders of affordable housing. So that would be the costs of the event, the staff time, the follow-up, possibly consultant to either run such a summit or follow up with some kind of action plan. But I think that's long overdue. I mean, we've had housing studies, but have we ever actually invited people who build housing to these things, who fund affordable housing? I think that would be a great first step.
Councilmember Zulik.
I also think that we should maybe look into funding a potential change to the UDO. I've heard that there are some hesitancies in terms of pursuing different UDO changes because it's so expensive. And I think if we went into the next year knowing that like this is a priority for us, that maybe some of those hesitancies would be alleviated.
Yeah, I would like to concur with that. I've said it since last year, but also, I mean, it has played into decisions that we've made in the last several weeks even, that the potential of that happening. So I would be like, yeah, absolutely. I would very much want to see that in the budget.
What kind of funding do you think is needed for UDO changes?
I mean, last year, I think, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Director Hiddle said something to the extent of $300,000.
To do what exactly?
I think to get consultants to actually start the process instead of this like changing around the edges, but actually starting
Okay,
from
so it's like
a
the
new
full
form base,
overhaul sort of
Yeah.
proposal? Okay.
And I don't think that sort of ends in 1 year, but to start that process, I think.
Okay, I want to thank the community member who just texted me and reminded me that leaf pickup was what a pin got put in earlier from Councilmember Ruff. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of overhauling the UDO has some merit. I think for the benefit of the public, and maybe for colleagues as well, I would like to hear what you mean by that and why that's going to be helpful.
I can happily. In short, I think that we need a form-based UDO. rather than a Euclidean one. So I would be writing a form-based UDO.
What's that?
Oh, okay, sure. For the benefit of the public. So Euclidean UDO starts with there's three elements to planning, right? Land use, management, and then form. Form-based UDO starts with form, then does management, then does land use. To the question of why, it's perhaps, it's the direction that cities are moving in, but I think the main reason why, to say it succinctly, is that it allows us to deal with, I think, the sort of snake of Bloomington development, which is things like permitting. The feedback that we've got from a lot of developers, to the point of wanting to do a summit, is that basically that our rules are quite complex here. It's difficult to do business here, so it makes it a lot easier for developers, makes it a lot easier for people wanting to be in the community, but it also then allows us the capabilities of having the provisions to keep certain characteristics that people might want while also allowing more housing to be built.
So if I may just follow up, I think that would go well with a housing summit, where we would have a housing summit first, and we would invite input from people who build housing and people in the community who have concerns as well as expertise in this area. And that may well lead us to some concrete things we would want to see in a UDO revision.
I totally agree, would agree, yeah.
As a follow-up, Councilmember, sorry, have you spoken with our planning department one-on-one about that concept?
Yes, and also publicly in these meetings, yes.
Okay. All right, other specific budget lines. Councilmember Flaherty.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to follow up on the same thread I'd written in my list of specific proposals here, 200 to 400,000 for contract work to create a plan to change the Unified Development Ordinance in line with existing city policies, seeking to increase housing supply, diversity of housing types, and housing affordability, both subsidized and market rate. I think that could be a form-based code change. I think getting clarity on that point and the buy-in from the administration is critical, because my recollection is that I've been advocating for a form-based code for at least 8 years. I think it was the approach we should have taken in 2019 when we updated the UDO. We did not. We have kind of a hybrid. We have some form-based elements, but it's still highly segregated by uses. My understanding from Director Hiddle when he spoke on this last year was that it felt early or premature relative to the age of the UDO and when that was done to make a large switch to a form-based code, and that might be like 5+ years out yet. That's a really important thing to nail down with specificity, specifically from the mayor, and in writing if possible, because there's been a lot of wiggle room and kind of shifting on what I've heard from the administration over time on some of these things. Various changes we've looked at, worked with staff on, that staff understands as good policy, experts understand are good policy, that they fully supported, are things like adjusting lot size minimums to accord with existing form of neighborhoods, adjusting setbacks to align with existing form of neighborhoods, to have that control over the type of building, the style of development, what it looks like, but at the same time to enable more modest housing to be built. Specifically in that case, it would probably enable a lot of single-family owner-occupied housing. But those are form-based changes that we can make and make progress on in interim steps forward in the absence of a full-on commitment to an overhaul of the UDO starting next year. And repeatedly, my understanding from staff was that we are not ready for that overhaul. Now we're hearing something different, and so I think getting clarity on that's really quite critical as we talk about what budget expenditures could look like.
May I say something?
Yep.
I mean, so in the question and answers for the budget, I wrote, I'm intrigued by the possibility of moving towards a form-based code in the future. Could you elaborate on the timeline and the potential cost associated with this shift? How this transition improve housing development outcomes? And the answer was a transition to a true post-Euclidean form-based code would require a full overhaul of the UDO that would involve a relatively specialized ordinance rewrite, and they said 300 to 500K, and a timeline of approximately 12 to 24 months. I mean, so this is in writing, right? But I agree. But I agree. I mean, to the point, I very much agree with what Councilmember Flaherty is saying, that as pertains to the budget and then the follow-on policy that we may want to pursue or not pursue, I think that just echoing that comment, that I think the conversation that has to be had, and this is the time where we get to have this, is that actually a commitment, and that's why we put money towards it, right? So that's the point that I'm making, is that, I mean, if we're going to put money towards it so that it happens, is the way that I would view that.
Could I actually ask a clarifying question from what?
Yeah, go for it.
Councilmember Sari just quoted? The 12 to 24 month timeline, that all makes sense. But did it say a starting time, like when we would implement that, or was that not part of it?
And if you recall, when during the meting, that was one of, I mean, you have no reason to recall this, right? I mean, we asked quadrillion questions over 2 weeks, but I asked during the meeting to Director Hiddle that question specifically, and the answer was that we expect to put this in the budget for next year. So I mean,
My
that,
recollection
yeah.
is different, but yeah, getting clarity on this point would be helpful. Thank you.
I've had a more recent conversation with him about that, and I think the 5-year timeline at least includes things like, I think the 1 to 2 year timeline is literally like writing it, as opposed to all of the public input and all of the community understanding and greater education about what form-based code is and how it's different from what we have now, and that I think the actual writing of it is probably the easy part. And the hard part is all of that other stuff that is a little bit grayer and would probably cost more in time than it would in money.
Exactly, but I think
That's why I asked earlier if you had talked to him about that directly recently, because I've talked to him about that within the last
Something has
month.
to be defined. Yeah, exactly. But I do think as pertains to the budget, right? I mean, this tension that we're walking between policy changes and other priorities that we might have versus budgetary priorities. I think that Councilmember Flaherty's question is the guiding question, and I think that the answer to that determines all of the answers to some of these other things that we're discussing. So.
All right, Councilmember Rosenberger.
Thanks. I, too, would love to see a form-based code. The idea of having a restaurant that looks like a house next door to my house is a dream, I would say. So I don't have to cook things all the time, and it smells good all the time in my backyard. So that's very exciting. From recent conversations I also have had with Director Hiddle, I was told kind of like a 4 to 5 to 10 year timeline, which 10 seems not right, but 4 to 5, and then also that in those 5 years, that also like making updates to our current UDO are steps in the direction of a form-based code too. So as we allow more options in our zones, that is getting people more ready for an entire form-based code, because I think most people out there don't know what a form-based code is, which is, why should anyone? And I think there will be, of course, like some major pushback about the ideas of like what could go in your neighborhood if it looks like what is next door to it will be startling to some people. But so just a note to still encourage and say what I said in the beginning to some of you, that I want both, and I want a form-based code, and I want to make immediate changes to our UDO to help our housing supply problem.
Could I say another specific thing, maybe moving on to more things on the list?
Yeah, I think so. Hang on to that just a second, though, because Councilmember Piedmont Smith, did you have a specific budget thing, or did you want to add something on to the UDO conversation?
I had another budget thing relating to housing.
Okay, great. Then Councilmember Piedmont Smith, why don't you go with that? And then we'll come back to you.
Well, we have to recognize that the federal landscape and support for affordable housing from the federal government is very different this year than it was in the past. And we have some very important programs that are already funded by HUD that the city runs, like homeowner repair programs, individual rental assistance, down payment assistance. These are all going to face cuts from the federal government. And I think we need to spend some local money to keep these programs going because they keep people in their current affordable housing. So I'd like to see money go towards that.
Great, thank you. Councilmember, sorry, what was your
on
next
the
actual
point
budget thing?
of housing, the question of permitting, in this last year's budget, we put money towards updated software that could then, and then we did that interlocal agreement, all those good things with the county. I'd like to see us fund, and I'll just, for the sake of calling it something, like a permitting concierge service or something like that, or piloting something like that. Also funding updates to web presence, web tools, web-based tools to facilitate the permitting process, I think both for building, for business creation, for art installation, you name it.
Okay. Other specific budget things before we move on to our activity of what currently, Councilmember Flaherty?
I had two other things, so 4 things total. One was just voicing support for appropriate funding for the council office to function well.
Yep.
I think we're working through some potential reclassification of positions to allow us to competitively attract and retain staff, which has been a challenge, as well as potentially the need for outside counsel, on retainer for some issues. We have unique questions, unique needs as the city's legislative and fiscal body. Sometimes there are interpretations from the Corporation Council that are very favorable to the opinion of the mayor, but might be counter to the council's interests. We have a different set of interests and a different need to explore some of those things. Additionally, I think that type of funding need can extend into other types of contracted support beyond legal, potentially, I think fiscal expertise has been mentioned previously, again, for kind of consulting services or advisory services to the council, as well as even like public engagement support. If we are going to try to lead processes where the mayor doesn't want to or is choosing not to, but it's a priority to the council, if we want to do that well, we frankly can't do that with the staffing we have and the expectations for council members without it being simply unsustainable. So I think I wrote 200K. I don't know what that actually looks like. Maybe that's a high peg for like what would be needed, but I think it is important to evolve our budget to reflect that. So that's one. I can say the second thing, or I can stop.
Go for it. Go for the second thing.
The second thing was, again, I put this at 200 to 400K. Maybe it's high, but to integrate and operationalize equity in the whole of city government, including with deep community collaboration, especially equity and justice-focused organizations and groups, and with council involvement. Last year, we talked about the possibility of staffing for this. And we've kind of discussed it in 2 places. There was the budget conversations in which the administration said, well, no, we need to take stock. We're not going to hire anybody. We want to take stock. We agree this is important. We're going to look internally, create a plan, create a team, et cetera. So that was the commitment at August of last year. And then also the council's process committee looked at this. I kind of led a survey review of leading cities and what they're doing, as well as leading entities like the Government Alliance on Racial Equity. And kind of there's a range of options from framework development and tool development to use in the legislative and policy development process, budgeting, et cetera, to staffing and resourcing, to training, that we commit to on an ongoing basis. So there's a variety of options out there, but it was clear in that survey, because I also looked at our city policies and plans, that it's very scattershot. There's no unifying framework or holistic vision or even definitions of what types of equity or justice we're talking about. It kind of barely appears in the comprehensive plan. So I think if we're serious about those values, and I think most of us are, it takes, again, probably contracted support. We don't have To the extent that we do have staff expertise in-house, it's not their primary job. That, you know, they're running departments or doing other things and engaged with the community. So if we're serious about actually taking a whole of government approach to equity and policy development, community engagement, et cetera, I do think that will take a plan and dedicated support. And that was my ballpark of what it could look like. So that's my other item. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We're going to move on to the activity now, but I realize that I haven't said mine. Though it relates to some other things, totally agree with Councilmember Piedmont Smith about those direct grants and assistant programs that support residents. I think they're really important, and that we should figure out a way to fund those. And if they're not going to be federally funded, then we should see if we can do that somehow in-house. And then I also agree with Councilmember Rallo about the maintenance stuff, and I kind of have this question that that I need to ask our controller, like, how much money do we actually spend right now on annual maintenance, and kind of like just to like keep things going at this like basic level of infrastructure funding. And then I also think that we need to invest in a crosswalk plan, because and I've talked with this in planning before, they're not all maintained. There's not actually a plan for like how often they get repainted, and there's so many crosswalks all over town that you just can barely even see anymore. And I've actually had constituents reach out about different locations that don't have crosswalks at all that maybe need them, because there is this implied thing like every corner, in theory, as a pedestrian, you have the right to cross, but I mean, cars barely stop for crosswalks as it is. They're not gonna stop at corners that don't even have them. And this, to some degree, leads us into this activity. So once again, I want council members to do it too, if they want to, okay? There are Post-it notes over on the council table. If somebody over there could hold up a pack of Post-it notes, and there's some pens. So if you are in chambers right now, you get to get up and move around. And I want you to think about programs, activities, et cetera, things that the city currently does, right, currently funds, that matter to you personally, that you utilize personally, that makes a big difference in your life, or something that you have utilized. And an example I'll give is we are giving like rebates essentially right now for electric bicycles for residents. And at the State of the City, there was actually a recipient of one of those who stood up and was like, this has changed my life. So sometimes those little things change people's lives. So I want you to write that program or that activity or whatever it is. You know, it could be a park program. You could go coach basketball at Twin Lakes. And, you know, that matters to you a lot and your family a lot. So I want you to write that down on a Post-it note, and I want you to put it under the budget outcome area as, you know, those 12 areas that were defined earlier, okay? Now, if you're on Zoom right now and you also want to participate in this, I would like you to, if you can, type a chat message to the host saying what your activity is, and then in parentheses, what outcome area it belongs in. So we're just going to take maybe 10, 15 minutes, move around the room a little bit, and think of some of those very specific things that the city currently does that really matters to you. And so if you're on Zoom and you chat those things, those will all end up getting recorded. And for the person who earlier mentioned, is there going to be a record of this? This is also something that will end up at the fiscal committee meeting next week. So thank you for that little break and move around and a little bit of conversation. And one of the things that I was thinking about as I was watching people in chambers put up Post-it notes as I was reflecting on the places that didn't have any, and reflecting on some, because the activity was supposed to be to think about things that the city already does that you like and that you support and that you really want to keep or increase funding to. And one of the things that we talked about earlier was that idea of identifying places where that we think are important, but we are lacking in. So that's kind of an interesting way to use this too, is not only to go like, oh, look at all the things that people love and the areas that we're doing well in, but also what are some places that maybe we identified as important that don't have as much in them, and how can we do better at that? So it's kind of a two-pronged activity. So the last piece of our conversation tonight, before we go to public comment, and so I want to go to public comment no later than 8:15, is talking about some of those big, broad goals of vision or policy direction, and then also some of those specific outcomes. And I am going to note again that one of those specific outcomes that Councilmember Rosenberger already kind of said was she was reading some very specific measurable outcomes from the Climate Action Plan. And so I just want to note that we talked about that, and that needs to be a piece of what gets identified in terms of some of those specific outcomes from our specific plans. So, broad goals, vision or policy direction, specific outcomes, measurable results. I think whoever wants to speak to either or both of those things. Councilmember Rallo.
I'll just drill down on a couple specific budget items. One is public safety related, and this is to provide adequate fire response to the southwest quadrant of Bloomington. Since the 2002 Growth Policies Plan, we were to build a fire station in that location. We were assured that we would have land from the Summit development, so we have the land to do it. But we will probably need to bond for that fire station. But I think it's a high priority because the population has been growing steadily, and now it's going to explode in that area. And already, my understanding is that the fire department has difficulty getting there with a response time that they would like. And I should say to that part, extending into the county. So I think that's a high priority for me. Another is.
Can I interrupt you for just a second?
Yeah.
So is that under broad goals then in terms of
No,
this
that's a
worksheet?
specific budget item. Or it's a specific budget. It's not going to be in the budget per se, but it should be probably a bond that would be, presented by the administration that we would.
Okay, so you were adding something on to what we
that we
talked
would
about
support.
earlier
Yeah.
instead of that.
Yeah, I've covered the broad goals. So I thought I would just hit a couple of the specific budget items. Can I mention another?
Okay.
Maybe two? I don't have to cover everything.
Well, we had already talked about those and you hadn't said it at the time, but go ahead.
Wait, specifics?
Yes.
You just said specifics.
No, I said broad goals and then measurable outcomes, like the specific measurable results and
Okay,
how we would
so-
measure that.
All right, so
But-
the broad goal is public safety.
Right.
The specific request is for a bond for a Southwest fire station along Tap Road somewhere there in that area. Obviously, the specific outcome it would be to ensure response time needed for that area, and also anticipating another 10 or 12,000 people living in that area with the Summit development. Regarding, I kind of mashed these together, the equity and health and human services as a broad goal, and particularly as Councilmember Piedmont Smith described, which is that we need to prepare for not only potentially economic dislocation of people, but the lack of federal funding, which has already been cut year by year. CDBG block grants have been falling year by year. I put it on remember I presented that a year or so ago. So understanding that that is coming, I think that we need to double Jack Hopkins spending. We're spending $500,000 now, we should spend $1 million. And that would just put us where we used to be about 20 years ago, frankly, with federal and local social service spending. And obviously so the outcome would be it reestablishes social service spending from the past. And then I'll just mention one last one, since we haven't talked about it. Well, we talked a little bit about sustainability and climate change and so forth, but specific to Bloomington, and this is an ever-growing problem, reducing invasive plants. We have a code. It's supposed to be followed. The developers, many of them, some do, many of them don't. Maybe they put in something that's a native. Maybe it fails. They put in fountain grass, and then it spreads everywhere. So those are propagules. It spreads from into the county, into the environment. The only way that's going to be addressed is a specific budget item, which is to hire one FTE in planning for non-native enforcement and education. And obviously the outcome would be that we would at least mitigate, if not diminish, the invasive. I'll quit there. I could talk about many more things, but.
Okay, great. I do want to say to all council members, if there's something that you don't quite get to tonight because there's only so much time that we have this evening, please email that to myself and Councilmember Piedmont Smith as chair of the fiscal committee, so that then we can incorporate those comments next week. Councilmember Rosenberger.
This is going to be anything, right? I mean,
At this
it can
point,
be
I
anything.
think so.
I mean, it's hard because, again, we have 4 big plans with tons of goals and metrics for measurement in them. I mean, talking about climate action plan, again, it's just really what I have on top right now. I guess I'm thinking too about what we've talked about in the budget before. So this is the goal of increasing organics diversion by 40% of 2018 values in our waste, okay, waste reduction. We don't even have a composting option for residents anymore. We've never had it a public service, and now we don't have a private service, which I call it a very embarrassing thing. There are all these sub-plans, things to do, food scraps bag pilot, certification for businesses to go zero waste. So some budget thoughts would be to stop subsidizing our trash pickup, because we do that, I think it's about $1 million a year, and use this money to start composting. Also look at a pay-as-you-throw program, which helps people think more about what they're putting into their trash cans and whether or not they want to consume less or put their can out less, right? And that might mean upgrading our system. I have no idea, to keep track of each pickup, because right now I don't know that we do that, but I think all of our bins do have scan tags on them. Okay. That's a little thing.
Okay, thank you. Others? Broad goals, specific outcomes, measurable results. Councilmember, sorry.
One thing that I'd love to see is, and this sort of falls in a lot of categories, is some at least pilots around food security. So I'll go through it with that framework. I mean, thinking about neighborhood livability and social health, I'd like to see some type of funding, initiatives around community gardens, mobile markets, perhaps meal delivery, pantry partnerships, type of things, with specific outcomes, for example, of increasing the number of households with access to fresh produce within walking distance by 25%, as an example. or reducing food insecurity rates. I don't know if we actually are measuring that, but in targeted neighborhoods like Crestmont, as an example, by 15% or something like that. I think similarly under, I'll skip that one, under like economic health, thinking about like food business microgrants is something I'd be interested in piloting, and looking, for example, to increase the number of food-based small businesses launched or expanded next year by X%. I think there's 0, so increase would be maybe easier to measure, or increase gross sales at local farmers market, at the farmers market by 25%, something like that. And I have others in other categories, but just to, I know we're short on time.
Okay. Councilmember Zulik.
I think it would be worth looking into how we could invest in how the city communicates with the rest of the community. There are quite a lot of really great programs at the city that when I go out and I talk to my constituents, like they don't know about. And there's only so much that services that aren't being utilized can do for our community. So I think it would be worth putting real money behind that so that people could take advantage of the programs that we do currently have and the programs that we've talked about pursuing.
Thank you. Councilmember Flaherty.
Sure. I had a little bit of a hard time grappling with some aspects of this. I think I support the idea of outcomes-based budgeting and holding ourselves accountable to outcomes. I think it's been mentioned, we do have a variety of city plans that were developed with input of hundreds of residents, informed by expertise, that set goals and outcomes. I think sometimes those aren't always the best goals. Like our comprehensive plan doesn't really have like SMART goals, for instance, as a framework, and everything's not always like the most measurable. I think there's some improvement that could happen there. I'm a little wary of us like introducing new outcomes or new metrics. Maybe if it's in an area where we don't have plans in place already, but it feels like, I'm not sure council members just sort of like throwing out their own ideas here. It's like, I don't know, there's limits to that. And also like we're sort of broadly talking about a theory of change of some kind. Another way to think about that is like a logic model that traces inputs to outcomes and impact. And there's steps in between. You go from inputs, which is the resourcing, to activities and outputs that come before outcomes. So I'm very familiar with those frameworks, and like we're sort of missing the middle pieces here, which is basically policy development, implementation, some level of outputs that might have indicators of their own that lead to outcomes. So like increased miles of sidewalk, for instance, might lead to other outcomes like increased pedestrian mode share. Additionally, the other thing I'm worried about is like the timescales of some of these things relative to like an annual budgeting cycle. And so I think we didn't do a great job necessarily in our comp plan of like tracking the most useful indicators, and in particular lead indicators, not lag indicators. So often we're measuring things on a lag that is too late to be actionable and kind of just like, it's like, did this happen or not? But what we really want to measure, I think, are the outputs and things that we produce that based on evidence from other places, will lead to the outcomes that we're looking for. And so, I don't know. So I think that's the framework I'm kind of bringing to this, and it feels like I know we're just iterating on a process and kind of like learning our way forward through doing. But those are two things that kind of concerned me about, I guess, like how we're approaching this. Is one, like if it's too divorced from existing city policy, which certainly had a lot more public input and buy-in across branches of government here than like what we're starting with this process. And then second is kind of like some of the pieces that might be missing from the framework. So that's not, those aren't suggested. Zero deaths in our streets, or one that I mentioned earlier, right? Like we could talk about like increase in housing starts for certain types of housing, that we'd like to see that our plans accept. So like there's progress to be made on this, but I don't know. This feels a little divorced from me from like existing policy and plans. Sorry, I realize that's like not helpful. It's just a reflection.
No, I agree. Yeah, I think that it's hard
I think everything you just said is so helpful, and I think that is, I wish, I kind of wish we had got to that point earlier in the conversation, right? Like, I think that's in my mind was the appropriate outcome of this conversation, is that, I think the real, like, let's talk about the outcomes we want with try to changing our budget process, is to directly tie our spending and our policy that follows to things that we've already got a lot of public input to. And I think, so I wholeheartedly, I think, second what Councilmember Flaherty said. I think that, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. I agree.
Yeah, I would also say probably that a lot of the maybe not all of the things we've talked about tonight, but a lot of them were really familiar sounding to me from things that I read in the comp plan when I read it, and just going like, oh yeah, like we said we wanted to do this thing. How much money is being invested in it right now? How much could we invest in it? And with some things, I feel like even if we do invest money in it, like that's not necessarily the solution that it needs. Like it doesn't necessarily need money right now. It needs something different. And so I think teasing those things apart could be useful, generally speaking. I'm not sure who I should go to right now because I had 3 people express interest in speaking. So, Councilmember Ruff.
Quick. Just back to the point I made earlier about the high-performing government.
Your mic's off.
The high-performing government broad goal. So paying our city employees a commensurate, on par with other Midwestern peer cities, I just don't see how we can deliver a high-performing government if we aren't paying to keep high-performing employees. And the side benefit of that is we hope it would have a slight upward pressure on general wages in the city. The better we pay a fairly large employer like Bloomington. So that's important to me. And then the last thing I'll say real quick is be interesting to do this exercise coming from the other perspective. Like everything we've talked about is going to require some investment. There's kind of a wish list. Well, we are going to need to raise taxes or reduce our investment in some other things. So it'd be kind of interesting to have this kind of discussion about where do we think we would invest less or we would put less into. Anyway, that's all. Thank you.
Sure. We have about 2 minutes before I want to go to public comment. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
This is, the last 5 minutes have been extremely interesting. What I wanted to mention from my list is something that we don't really have a community plan on, and maybe we should. I don't know. I think it is something that kind of, follows from other community values that have been stated, but that's in the realm of public safety. And so I had 2 desired outcomes related to that. One was increase the capacity of Stride Mobile Community Responder Program to handle all nonviolent mental health emergency calls through central dispatch by the end of 2027. And then following that, decouple central dispatch from the BPD and train dispatchers to send non-police community responder units to address mental health emergencies as appropriate by the end of 2028.
Great. Councilmember Rosenbarger, did you have one last thing to say before we go to public comment? Okay. Councilmember Allo.
Very briefly, great discussion. When I was looking through priorities, when I was looking at specific budget items, I was keeping in mind, where is the money coming from? And I'm very, very reticent to increase the ED lit in very uncertain times for people, because unfortunately it's a regressive tax. It seems to be the only thing available to us. So I'm looking at I guess I was prioritizing in terms of maintenance, public safety, common good items that really need attention as priorities. I mean, certainly there's a lot of things that could be funded. So anyway, that's something that we need to maybe curb our enthusiasm about some of these items. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, let's go ahead and go to a period of public comment on budget 2026, on how the city spends money, on whatever people out there want to talk about in terms of budget. So if you are in council chambers, you can make your way to the podium, you can sign in, state your name for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes. If you're online, you can raise your hand using the raise hand function, or you can send a chat message to the host. And we do have somebody here in chambers who would like to speak. So when you're ready,
Sure.
you can go ahead and state your name.
Good evening. My name is Daniel McMullen. These things start a little earlier than I remember. From everything that you guys have talked about tonight, it sounds like government performance and how you deliver services is the thing that matters most to you. From the simple service of maintaining roadways to really just anything. Housing is important, and I feel like that's a separate issue entirely from people who are unhoused. And you guys will touch on that later, I imagine, and hopefully I can be a little more engaged than I've been over the last 10 years going forward as the city transitions to a new age or whatever it should be called here. Something that I have personally been affected by recently is something not many of you may be able to elaborate on as I drive Uber part-time. The city recently decided that it should seasonally have a permanent closure of the Kirkwood and corridors. I think that's a fascinating idea, and it has its place here. However, between the downtown and places of the university, there's an issue with getting around to pick up. The majority of the users are students, but I myself am also a user of Uber on the weekends, as it's a lot wiser to not drink and drive. But in my thinking, having been asked to not stop and wait for a rider at the back end of the SPIA building and having to navigate now the downtown, why could we not utilize some of the spaces with like bike lanes, bus stops to have an Uber and Lyft shared space so users can kind of have a common ground to come to? I think also as they utilize the Lime scooters, I don't know if that's even what they are anymore around here. I'd like to do those myself downtown. Just don't let me do it in Nashville, Tennessee. I think as those things continue to gain popularity and frequent use, both from residents and from students alike, especially the lower income who may not get to use them every day, just putting those pieces together in a safe spot. I know we lost someone a couple of years ago using a scooter, and again, the main street of town, being Walnut Street, is heavily trafficked over the weekends with Uber and Lyft drivers alike, and sometimes it's hard for drivers who are just trying to get through to get by, and it makes it very unsafe. So maybe having 10 cars length of distance for drivers to be able to stop. I pay insurance to be an Uber driver to drive people around so they get to where they need to go safely. And I kind of expect the same for my driver. So, thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Are there other people in chambers who would wish to make a comment? Go ahead and state your name for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Madam President. I'm going to write my name and say good evening at the same time. It's Christopher Imge from the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. I'm going to get out of my main soapbox I have been, which is sort of personnel costs, but to reiterate what Councilmember Rallo said, that money is tight. We're heading through what looks to be, could be a recession coming in with decreased revenue and decreased means of getting revenue with SB1 and some other items that the state has before us. I wanted to sort of piggyback on a couple things that were said. I think Councilmember Rosenberger had the statement which was where does council make the biggest difference? And one of the things she says, which I think was kind of a good one, which was housing. Well, housing and sort of the unhoused are huge issues. Those are big lifts, and what council can do, I think, is to a varying degree is limited. But having sort of council actions that spur economic development, that spur investment from the private sector, whether that's developers, that's something important to look at. And I think Councilmember Flaherty mentioned quite a bit what I think was a good agreement with everyone on what does the city do well and what it can do, which is the mobility and transportation aspect. I think that investment in sidewalks and some other areas within potholes and road maintenance is just the basic essential services of government. We talked about outcome-based budgeting, and I look back, I think that was, was that 2021 with the lit increase that was $19 million. What is the outcomes on that particular tax increasing? Sort of look at specifically that we had them in buckets and different things within the buckets and buckets within buckets. So I think that would be a good place to sort of look at from point A to point B, beginning and end to some of that. And one thing that's come up a lot, I did a parks focus group last week. Thank you, Tim Street, for putting that on. And one thing that from the group of business leaders we came up with, which is a sort of overriding issue, is asset management. As parks has grown, the need for upkeep on that is great. What are we looking at on that? And we have a lot of great, wonderful, Banneker Center and all of these parks. I sort of went on my high horse on turf fields at Winslow Field, which get flooding just by looking at the forecast. So we have a lot of work to do within that, and that's not going into the Buzzkirk Theater, the Waldron Center, all these wonderful city assets that just need upkeep. We're only as good as that. Those things quickly deteriorate with deferred maintenance, only causes a ripple effect as far as that goes. Housing Summit, really like that idea, and my time all of a sudden is up, but thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Do we have anybody on Zoom who would wish to make a comment?
There are no hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else in chambers who would wish to make a comment? Come on up, please sign in, state your name for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Gerhard Glum. I teach economics at the university, but I'm speaking on my own behalf. When I go to social functions, when people ask me what to do, I say I'm an economist. Their response is, supply and demand, and then there's dead silence. Evidently, people think economics is very, very boring. Ever since January 20, economics has gone up in the excitement scale through the roof. Immigration, cuts to Medicaid, cuts to research, misinformation about vaccines, communicable diseases, all of those are exciting economic issues. The problem is there's a lot of misinformation, bad information, silly formulas that are used to fund policy, to justify policy. So I guess my comments come under the heading of high-performing government, because I'm going to make something available to all of you for free. You're all invited this Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock, to come to the downtown library. Professor Michael Hicks from Ball State will give a presentation on how tariffs influence jobs for Hoosiers. I imagine you're part of Indiana. Tariffs will have a big impact on this community, so all of you, your staff, the wider community is invited to learn about how tariffs might actually influence the quality of our lives here in Bloomington, Monroe County, and the rest of the state. So again, 2 o'clock, downtown library, auditorium, Professor Michael Hicks from Ball State. I hope you can all be there.
Yeah, that was this Saturday. Thank you for that comment. Next in chambers. Please sign in, state your name for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Steve Olin. As a member of the late lamented Parking Commission, one of the things that we had to do was try to identify costs of parking across departments, because even though there is now a parking services division, there is the parking costs and revenues cut across multiple departments. And so we asked for transaction level registers of departmental budgets, and there's an awful lot to learn in doing so. And I have to admit that as a council member doing regular business, it never occurred to me that it was worth my time to look at literal every transaction in a department's annual budget. But it turned out that you can learn an awful lot from doing it. So the first thing I'd like to encourage you all, since we are talking about budgets here tonight, is that you adopt a department and ask the controller for every transaction they conducted in the last year and just explore it with Excel. You're going to learn a lot, but I would go further and say that I don't think that's enough. I think that it's time that council think about literally auditing departments. Part of the issue is that no matter what the esteem you hold a department head in or the people of a department in, they may be unaware that they could be doing things more efficiently. You may be unaware that there is a department or a division that is wasting money, but you have no way to know it except through the administration. And so I would suggest that you seek to start putting money into the council budget specifically to hire an outside auditor to work on behalf of the council to do an independent audit of departments over a period of time. Maybe not all at once, but no matter what, you're going to learn an awful lot from the audit. An audit is not necessarily an effort to punish. It's a way to verify, to understand, to really dig into the details of a given department or division. But I've heard enough just tonight in the various areas that the council is concerned about that I think that it's time that you think about adding money for an independent auditor to work on behalf of council to analyze how the city is doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anybody online who's raised their hand at this point? Okay, looks like we have another commenter in chambers. Go ahead and sign in, state your name for the record, and then you'll have up to 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Greg Alexander. As you've heard me say, we are missing sidewalks around the edge of the city pretty consistently. You get about a quarter mile from the courthouse and you start noticing little gaps, and then you get a half mile and you notice big gaps, and a mile and the network becomes just a few choices. That's not a coincidence. Providing basic city services to a low-density population is not financially plausible. They are in a city, they deserve basic city services, but there aren't enough people living there to pay taxes to support things like sidewalks. You get it from the other side too. When you pay city staff, you have to pay them a competitive wage, but really you have to pay them enough to live here. They have to be able to pay rent, they have to be able to pay a mortgage, they have to imagine that they could stay and actually buy a house. Housing is everything you do. Our wages are inflated because there isn't housing. Our tax burden is inflated because there isn't housing. We need housing, and then we can solve these financial problems. But the life and death of cities is housing, and without enough housing to sustain the tax burden that we have, we're only going to be able to overtax people and underdeliver. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in chambers who would like to make a comment about the budget? Money, finances, economics? Did anybody end up raising their hand on Zoom? No. Great, thank you. We'll come back to council then for just if anybody has any last comments on this that they want to add in for consideration at this point. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
I'm trying to wrap my head around how this discussion is really outcome-based budgeting. So, I mean, we all kind of set our ideas and our priorities and all that. So just kind of thinking out loud, I heard a lot of colleagues say we need to look at the city plans that already outline our goals and the outcomes we want to see. So maybe that's one way to focus on outcomes. But other than that, I've heard, as chair of the fiscal committee, I'm envisioning it to be very difficult to pull from these diverse ideas up here certain outcome priorities. So I just wanted to state that and see what people think.
Any responses to that?
Well, maybe it would be helpful to talk about what the rest of the process is. I mean, because this is very early on and earlier than we started last year as well. So what is ahead in terms of communication around budget plans? What happens next?
Well, what happens next is the fiscal committee gets together a week from now, I believe, next Wednesday, and has a discussion about trying to prioritize the priorities. So last year, if you recall, we had the budget advance meeting and we had these ideas thrown out, and then we had a list of budget priorities that was given to the administration, but that list was not a prioritized list. That list was we can call it a randomized list. And so this year there was, I think most council members thought like, well, it would be more helpful to have a prioritized list of priorities so that then the administration has greater understanding of what our priorities actually are. And I personally kind of identified that as really highly challenging from the beginning, because we are, as a body, I think, really diverse in a lot of ways in terms of how we, of what our priorities are in terms of how we should invest our money. So I guess I kind of, as another member of the fiscal committee, I kind of share that sentiment that, like, how does the fiscal committee even start trying to prioritize what are really different inputs from all 9 council members. So, but that's in theory what we're trying to do, is we're trying to have a little bit more.
I was trying to, so the next meeting is of the fiscal committee, and the goal of that meeting is for the fiscal committee to put together a sort of draft document of how we understand priorities to be. What happens with that document?
That document comes back to
Let me ask 3 more
council.
questions, so then you can just answer at length. Which is, I think the point is that. I think to Councilmember Piedmont Smith's point is that, what other inputs do we need in order to move that process ahead, I think is the sort of guiding question here.
Yeah, I mean, what happens to that, like, prioritization list as it comes back to council at a special meeting on April 30th? April 30th.
We have another deliberation session then?
And then it's categorized as a special session because we would have to actually vote on the list of priorities.
Is that with the mayor there, or is that
No,
just for us? Yeah.
that's just for us. And then after we have that kind of established prioritization list, then our next deliberative session in May is with the administration, because in the meantime, while we're trying to develop our priorities, the administration is also developing their priorities. So then on the 14th of May, it can be like, hey, these are council priorities, these are mayor priorities, where do they overlap, where do they not overlap, how can we make all the things happen that people want to make happen.
Right. So then the question, I think, to Councilmember Piedmont Smith's point, I mean, what input would be useful to you as the chair to help move that process forward? Because we can do that. We can do that asynchronously.
That's true.
Well, I mean, we started talking about points of agreement and we just talked about housing, and then we talked about transportation. Well, we started to talk about transportation and mobility, but there were a lot of other things mentioned. So I guess I don't know. I don't even know. Because, if I had to now, work with my 3 colleagues on the committee to prioritize, I wouldn't know where to start. Because I also know that there are probably things that colleagues didn't even mention because we didn't get to them.
Right. So here's my plan on where to start. And so my thought on where to start is to consolidate notes and information, basically. And there are a couple of very nice volunteers in the audience today who helped take notes with this. And so to receive those notes and try to put together what all the council members said into the different outcome areas. And so my intention is to kind of do a bunch of preparation in terms of consolidation of what I heard tonight in preparation for the fiscal committee next week, so that then the information is already consolidated, even if the thoughts are really different. And so that might help the fiscal committee next week. That's my hope. And to similarly take the survey data, the community survey data, just to be like, what is it that people think is important?
Could I ask each of my colleagues to send myself and Councilmember Stossberg your completed worksheets for tonight, if you completed them? And if you didn't complete them, I recommend you do, or do some substitute so that we have something from you. Because I know that we didn't all get to everything on our list tonight.
That would be helpful. Councilmember Flaherty.
To what extent? I mean, I wrote some things on my worksheet that were like, see comprehensive plan or see climate action plan. I mean, do you want me to draw specific outcomes from there that I plug into the worksheet, or I mean, those are big plans, obviously, so it is.
In my opinion, I think that if I'm assuming that there's something, say, specific in the climate action plan or in the comp plan that you're looking at, a certain part of it, and you're going, we need to implement this part of it. Is that a correct assumption?
I don't know. I think not exactly. That's not where I started. So thinking about the inputs, to go back to the transportation example and the different types of, it was guided by the transportation plan, some of the infrastructure that we've said we want to build out. It was guided by the safety action plan and some of the goals we've set for ourselves and the changes that will necessitate, and the development of a sidewalk plan. So all those things are kind of happening and informing the input, the requested input. But as far as the outcomes, I think there's probably a bunch scattered across several plans that I could pull in that sort of all support that. It's not just one.
Not just one plan?
Not just one plan and not just one outcome.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I just need to go through the exercise to see what the limitations are, with more granularity.
I think that right now we need to just do our best at
Yep.
this and recognize that what we're trying to do as a body and as a city is a transition to outcome-based budgeting, and that it involves kind of a whole different mindset and a whole different formatting almost in terms of what we've seen before. So and my understanding is that this is kind of what, Councilmember Asari, this was your original brainchild in some ways. So what, 2 to 3 years, I think, is what was kind of cited, right, originally in that resolution in terms of a transition. So we're this is really the first year that we've really tried to do this in a serious way. So I guess my answer is do the best you can.
Okay.
Is that a good enough answer?
Yes, it is.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith, is that a good enough answer for your needs as chair?
Yes, it would be wonderful if you could pull those outcomes from the plans, but I understand that we all have time limitations.
Councilmember Rallo?
Well, it seems like this is going to be, we're focused on this budget this year. And I think that this discussion has refined my thinking about being very specific and for brevity, having short priorities, not having extensive priorities, because there's going to be a lot to wade through. And I think that, we ought to prioritize things and then think about specifics. And that would help the process, it seems to me, to sort through, rather than having tomes to try to read through and evaluate. So anyway, that's just my suggestion. Keep it brief.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just two general thoughts. I mean, the one is for us not to get super, and I think this is to Councilmember Flaherty's earlier point, is for us not to get super caught up in, or disconnected. I mean, it's very easy to just throw out numbers and metrics and then just, start from there and move backwards. That's not really the goal. I think that one thing that we've sort of found here is that nobody had any critiques outside of the housing and homelessness separation of any of the proposed categories. I think these are almost directly reflective of like what other cities like Fort Collins have done with them. I mean, that might be an area where if you have a strong feeling, we're actually like, no, I don't think, equity or something is not something that needs to be its separate area in the budget, but rather we want that, throughout. I think that's input that we probably still need. But I think one thing that's useful, the core of implementing outcome-based budgeting, is often what people call like offers, or this sort of sales element of it, that people come and they ask for things, and you and the council, the legislative body, the budgetary body, makes offers of those things. And importantly, what we're really talking about, the vast majority of our budget is what you might think of as just a continuing offer. And so I don't know if we need to spend a lot of time thinking about the things that we already do that need to just continue happening, right? I mean, paying the lights bills, as you will. And so it's that space outside those, what people would call enhancement offers, the things that we want to see happen in that flexible space of our budget, which is, I think, in terms of limiting, we don't need what we don't need from everybody at this moment is not, every single outcome you'd like to see in the budget, but things you'd like to see either enhanced, included that have not been included, increased. So the type of conversation that Councilman Morello brought up, we're doing well with Jack Hopkins. We want to increase that. That's I think the sort of the space that we need to be in, and then have some like theory of change that as Councilman Flaherty was saying, the reason why we think this should happen is, and so that helps us then in that final conversation of okay, where's this money coming from? If we think that it's our argument is by funding Jack Hopkins, we will achieve said outcome, what other things are trying to do that right now, and when we put those in contrast, which of these is more worth the money in this context for this year? So I think that sort of limits what we're talking about here. It's not the entirety of everything. We're just talking about those sort of enhancements and increases, if you will.
Does anybody else have any other things to add? Okay. Thank you all for this conversation. Thank you to the public who've involved themselves in various ways. I want to take a couple notes on council schedule. First of all, as has already been mentioned, the fiscal committee will meet next week, April 16th, at 2 in the afternoon to kind of synthesize this discussion. So if this was interesting to you, that might be a meeting that you want to tune into. It will be in person and online. It'll be a hybrid meeting. So there will be a Zoom link. And I think right now it's scheduled to be in Allison, but that might change to McCloskey. Not totally sure, but that'll be updated on the calendar if it changes. And then we'll have another special session on April 30th about budget again, and hopefully there'll be this prioritized list. Other things going on that I wanted to be sure to mention: tomorrow night, the Parks Department is having a master planning work session at 6 o'clock in Allison Conference Room. So there was a couple references to parks programs, and I know that I will be at that, and I believe 1 or 2 other council members will as well. So that'll be interesting. And then I also wanted to highlight on April 23rd, the Hopewell Commons grand opening is happening, starting at 3:30 in the afternoon and lasting, I think, until about 6. So those are things that you could put on your schedule. Our next regular session will be next week on April 16th. Are there other notes to add to the schedule? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, the Committee on Council Processes is meeting on Monday, April 14th, 12:15 to 1:45 in the Allison Conference Room.
Thank you very much. Any other committee meetings to announce today? The fiscal task force is meeting next Wednesday on April 16th. At what time? At 9 a.m. And so the difference with the budget task force, 8 a.m., sorry, the budget task force versus the fiscal committee, they do slightly different things related to this transition to outcome-based budgeting. So if you want more details on that, just email me and I'll clue you in. Thank you. If there's nothing else, we are adjourned.